I want to start off by saying I'm not the best public speaker. This may sound a little disjointed, but the history of Ireland's liberation and their labor movement would take a whole day to even scratch the surface. And my goal here is not to fully educate you on any of these matters, but rather to give you enough information that you can do some of your own informed research later. An educated public is what they fear the most. If we understand the systems that oppress us, then we might understand how to overcome them, and then they don't stand a chance. Liberation takes hard work, and a lot of it for a long time. We can use history to inform us how to proceed. For anyone wanting to learn more about the topic of the Irish labor movement, I highly recommend taking a look at the National Labor Historical Society, which I will touch on in just a little bit. Famous Irish author and playwright Oscar Wilde wrote in his introduction of the essay, "The Soul of a Man Under Socialism." The chief advantage that would result from the establishment of socialism is, undoubtedly, the fact that socialism would relieve us all from the sordid necessity of living for others, which, in the present condition of things, presses so hardly upon almost everybody. In fact, scarcely anyone escapes at all. What have we given up for capitalism? We do not own our labor or the means of production. Our very lives are dictated by these overlords. We live for them and we die the same. Wilde proposes that individuality would flourish under socialism when the working class would have the means to become individuals outside of their labor. He posits the great achievements are mostly made when one can separate himself from the world, mentioning the likes of Keats and Darwin. Socialism, like capitalism, communism, and fascism, are economic systems, how goods and services and the labor that produces them are managed. How we treat the workers sets the tone for how we treat everyone else in a given society. In systems where the working class can be and is exploited, they will find ways to marginalize groups of people to further oppress the working class as a whole. And the structure of colonialism is the framework for capitalism. It allows the general public to view things such as land and humans as mere commodities. Colonialism's hierarchical structure is the perfect breeding ground for capitalist ideology, as it more rewards individuals for controlling the labor and thus life of others, more so than it rewards the labor itself. As such, the history of any society trying to recover from the devastation of colonial rule is the history of workers advocating for their rights to control the means of production. It is not a coincidence that the biggest revolutionaries in history who fought against colonialism, who advocated for the rights of people of color, indigenous people, and other marginalized groups, also often labeled themselves as communists or socialists. One of my favorite parts about living in Dublin, Ireland, was that my small little apartment was just a block away from O'Connell Street, which sits in the heart of Dublin, bustling with life. Standing proudly in the street was a statue of James Larkin, also known as Big Jim. Big Jim was primarily known for his work as a staunch workers' rights advocate, one of the founding members of the Irish Labor Party, alongside James Connolly. Both men advocated for Ireland's independence and freedom from British control over the nation, understanding that it was not enough that Britain granted them freedom, but that their colonial mark that allowed for the working class to be separated from the fruits of their labor was erased. It would take an entire university degree to cover the entirety of Ireland's fight for liberation, both from Britain and as well as the liberation of the workers. But as I said, I just want to give you enough information so you can do your own research confidently. While the British colonization of Ireland began in the 12th century, the Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland became one in 1801, and as to be expected, 19th century Ireland was a period of opposition to the Act of Union, with the occasional violent rebellion that would ultimately fail. In 1829, one Daniel O'Connell would gain mainstream Irish appeal that would get him elected into the United Kingdom Parliament. Despite some successes for the working class and marginalized groups, he failed in his main mission, to liberate Ireland from British rule. Despite this failure, he is renowned for his efforts, and in 1924, Sackville Street was renamed to O'Connell Street in his honor. When you do your own reading after today, you will get a better grasp for how Ireland's fight for liberation is inherently entwined with Ireland's fight for the working class, more so than I can help you understand now. Many political and spiritual Irish leaders for long periods have been advocating for the end of British colonial rule in favor of a self-governed nation. The struggle against home rule came to a head in 1912 Ulster, one of the 4 traditional provinces in Ireland. Roughly 500,000 Irish Unionists would sign the Ulster Covenant, drafted by Sir Edward Carson, pledging to defy home rule by all possible means. This is a period of time marked by Irish infighting, uncertainty, but still a strong desire for a proud and independent Ireland. There would ultimately be 2 other Home Rule Acts, each causing their own unique upheaval and devastation in Ireland. But I would like to bring the conversation back to James O'Connelly and James Big Jim Larkin. Big Jim was a man who began with little means and littler education, taking up various jobs when he was just a child. He became a full-time trade union organizer in 1905, and just 2 years later was one of the main organizers of the Belfast dock strike, in which he succeeded in having the workers join the National Union of Dock Labourers. After this, Larkin would move south towards Dublin and, with mixed success, convince more trade workers to join their respective unions. James Connolly began his work as a socialist in Scotland, where he was born to Irish parents. Later, he moved to Dublin, although from 1905 to 1910, he lived in the United States working as an organizer for the industrial workers of the world. Upon his return to Ireland, he worked alongside Larkin and one William O'Brien to form the Labour Party, which was formed to represent the interest of workers in anticipation of the Third Home Rule Act that would allegedly grant Ireland more sovereignty. James Connolly would ultimately, sadly, be executed on 1916 during the Easter Uprising after the proclamation of the Irish Republic, a document declaring Irish independence, alongside 6 other signatories. The Labour Party was significantly weakened, sadly, after the Dublin lockout, which is regarded as one of the most significant events in the labour movement's history, as well as a major industrial dispute. On August 26, 1913, tram workers deserted their vehicles in a protest against their employer, William Martin Murphy, of the Dublin United Tramways Company, who forbade them from joining Larkin's Irish Transport and General Workers Union. 2 days later, Larkin and his comrades were arrested for breaking public peace and speaking out against the government, though they were released the same day. The following days were full of workers attending meetings that the police prohibited, riots, funerals, and more union busting. Ultimately, there was no fair resolution for the workers, and many of the striking employees were not rehired. But the volume and the impact of the strike would empower workers for decades to come. When my mom first told me that she had volunteered me to speak here today, she said people were interested in hearing about the labor movement in Ireland. I misunderstood and thought she meant the Labour Party, which is a small part of a much bigger picture of the Irish workers' liberation. But originally, for those who don't know, the Labour Party was a socialist party. One of my internships I completed during my time living in Dublin was at the National Labour Historical Society, my happy place, an archive dedicated to Ireland's Labour Party and its history. I spent 2 weeks combing over every single document from the now former President of Ireland, Michael D. Higgins' office, a member of the Labour Party. Another internship I completed was at the 14 Henrietta Tenement Museum, which stands to document the lives of those whose stories are often go untold. Those who lived in the tenement homes, many of whom would at some point join in the strikes to advocate for fair wages, safer working conditions, and to be able to join their respective unions. In these tenement homes, whole families were crammed into small, single rooms. They lived in squalor, many passing due to illness brought on by their poor living conditions. The Labour Party of Ireland began deeply rooted in socialism, and while it has departed from socialist ideology in its entirety, it does not stand ashamed of its roots, and many older people who have belonged to the party for decades proudly announce their own socialist ideology and how they implement that into their work with the Labour Party. The walls of the archive in the National Labour Historical Society are decorated with old political cartoons advocating for the well-being and empowerment of the working class. Through combing through the documents of the office of Michael D. Higgins, it became apparent that the members of the Labour Party greatly concerned themselves with humanitarian crises in other parts of the world, hosting discussions about human and workers' rights issues everywhere from the United States to Nicaragua to China. These documents, dating back decades, paint a picture of the Labour Party's long-held understanding that as members of the working class, our oppression and our liberation are connected, that we cannot be free until we are all free.
Woohoo!
Over in Ireland, socialism isn't a dirty word. Its mention doesn't bring up anxieties and emotions that are reminiscent of the McCarthyism era and the Red Scare. Ireland's not a socialist country, but you do not risk immediate criticism. Your morals and loyalty to the nation are not immediately called into question. The quality of life for workers became apparent after just a few days into my internships, being able to take breaks as needed without judgment, seeing that my supervisors actually had life in their eyes, and seeing that they could take pride in their work without it driving them to an early grave or burnout. It felt like a different world at times. While there is much more work to be done there, there's far more work to be done here. While we advocate for history to not repeat itself, we can also look to the past to learn how to make the present and the future better for everyone. I want to end this on an uplifting note after talking about failed rebellions, failed strikes, and an execution. As I mentioned, in the heart of Dublin is O'Connell Street, where a statue of James Big Jim Larkin stands proudly. Engraved at the bottom is a quote that's been on my mind a lot. It gives me hope that someday we can realize our full potential and build a world where we can not just live in, but thrive in. It reads simply, "The great appear great because we are on our knees. Let us rise."